I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Deborah Kingston standing on my porch with that tight-lipped smile she reserved for delivering bad news. She clutched a manila folder against her chest like it was sacred scripture, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against its surface as I opened the door to my home in Fairbanks, Alaska. "Lucas Xander?" she asked, though she knew exactly who I was. We'd lived in the same neighborhood for 3 years. "You know it's me, Deborah," I said, wiping grease off my hands with a shop towel. I'd been working on my snowmobile in the garage when the doorbell rang. "I'm here in my official capacity as president of the Evergreen Valley Homeowners Association," she announced, her voice taking on that officious tone that made my teeth itch. "We've received complaints about your property." I leaned against the doorframe, looking past her at the row of cookie-cutter houses lining our street. The November sky was already darkening even though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. Winter came hard and fast this far north, and the forecast was predicting a major cold snap within the week. "What complaints?" I asked. She opened the folder with a theatrical flourish. "Multiple residents have expressed concerns about the unsightly propane tanks you've installed on the side of your property. They're visible from the street and violate our community aesthetic standards." I felt my jaw tighten. Those tanks aren't unsightly, they're necessary. And I checked the original HOA bylaws before I bought this place. There's nothing in there about propane storage. "The board voted last month to update our regulations," Deborah said, her smile growing sharper. "All exterior fuel storage must now be approved by the architectural committee and properly screened from view. Your tanks meet neither requirement. Last month, nobody told me about any vote. The minutes were posted in the community newsletter," she replied smoothly. "Ignorance of the rules doesn't exempt you from following them, Lucas." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. Deborah had been a thorn in my side since she'd been elected HOA president 8 months ago. She'd cited my neighbor for having the wrong shade of beige paint on his shutters, and fined another family for putting up Christmas lights 2 days before the approved date. "Deborah, those propane tanks are my backup heating system. Natural gas is the primary heat for this neighborhood, but anyone with half a brain knows you need a backup this far north. What happens if the gas lines freeze or there's a service interruption?" "That's what the electric baseboards are for," she said dismissively. "Electric baseboards that cost a fortune to run and won't do much good if the power goes out," I countered. "Look, I'm a mechanical engineer. I know heating systems. This isn't about aesthetics. This is about safety and common sense." "This is about following the rules," Deborah said, her voice hardening. "You have 2 weeks to remove the propane tanks or have them properly screened. If you don't comply, you'll be fined $500 per day until the violation is corrected." She thrust a formal notice into my hands and turned on her heel, marching back to her silver SUV parked at the curb. I watched her drive away, feeling a knot of anger and frustration forming in my gut. My wife Sarah had warned me about this place when we were house hunting. She'd gotten bad vibes from the HOA during our initial walkthrough, but the price had been right, and the location was perfect for my commute to the engineering firm where I worked. Now, I was regretting not listening to her instincts. I went back inside and found Sarah in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She looked up as I entered, her long brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Let me guess," she said. "Deborah, how'd you know?" I saw her car pull up. "What did we do wrong this time?" I handed her the notice. She read it, her expression growing more incredulous with each line. "They want you to remove the propane tanks, the ones you just installed last month, or screen them from view, whatever that means." Probably some expensive fence or landscaping that would defeat the whole purpose of having quick access to them. Sarah set the notice on the counter and turned back to the stove. Can they actually fine us $500 a day? According to this, yes. It's in the updated bylaws. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my email. I never got any notification about a vote or new regulations. Did you check the community newsletter? Who reads those things? They're usually just reminders about trash pickup and announcements for bake sales. Sarah gave me a look that said she agreed but wouldn't admit it out loud. What are you going to do? I'm going to fight it. Those tanks are necessary equipment, not some decorative choice. If they push this, people could get hurt. Over the next week, I tried every avenue I could think of. I attended the next HOA board meeting and argued my case, bringing charts and data about heating system failures in extreme cold. Deborah and her two board members, Margaret Chen and Patricia Owens, listened with expressions of polite indifference. Your concerns are noted, Deborah said when I finished my presentation. But the rules are the rules. The Architectural Committee has determined that your propane tanks are not in compliance with community standards. What community standards? I demanded. Half the houses in this neighborhood have propane grills on their decks. Are you going to ban those too? Grills are different, Margaret said. She was a retired accountant who seemed to take pleasure in nickel and diming everything. They're temporary recreational equipment. My tanks are permanent safety equipment. Not according to the fire marshal, Patricia chimed in. She was younger than the other two, maybe 40, with bleached blonde hair and too much makeup. We checked with his office. Propane storage isn't required by any building code. Not required doesn't mean it's not smart, I shot back. Has anyone on this board actually lived through a real cold snap up here? The three women exchanged glances. I had my answer. They were all relatively new to Alaska, transplants from warmer climates who'd moved north for jobs or family, but didn't really understand the environment. The decision stands, Deborah said firmly. You have 1 week remaining to comply or the fines begin. I left that meeting fuming. When I got home, Sarah was waiting up for me despite the late hour. How did it go? About as well as expected. They won't budge. She wrapped her arms around me. Maybe we should just move the tanks. Is it really worth the fight? It's not about the tanks anymore, I said. It's about them making stupid rules that could put people in danger. What happens next time, when they decide something else essential is against their aesthetic standards? So what's your plan? I'm going to lawyer up. The next morning, I made an appointment with Robert Vasquez, an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Fairbanks, in a modest building with views of the Chena River. Robert was in his 50s, with gray hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd been in Alaska long enough to know its challenges. He listened to my story while taking notes on a legal pad. You have a copy of the original HOA bylaws from when you purchased the property? He asked. Yes, and there's nothing in there about propane storage or fuel systems. What about the updated bylaws? When were they officially filed? According to the notice, they were voted on last month and went into effect immediately. Robert frowned. That's a problem. Alaska law requires HOAs to provide 30 days' notice before implementing new rules that affect property rights. If they didn't properly notify all homeowners, the new bylaws might not be enforceable. They claim they posted it in the community newsletter. Email or physical mail? Email, I think, but I never saw it. That's not sufficient notice for major rule changes. They're required to send certified mail or hand-deliver notices for anything that imposes new restrictions or fines. He made another note. I think we have grounds to challenge this. However, litigation can be expensive and time-consuming. How expensive my retainer for HOA cases starts at $5,000. If this goes to court, it could run significantly more. I felt my stomach sink. $5,000 was a lot of money, especially with Christmas coming up and Sarah's student loan still hanging over us. Let me think about it, I said. Don't think too long, Robert advised. Once those fines start accruing, they can place a lien on your property. I've seen HOAs foreclose over unpaid fines. I drove home in a fog of worry and anger. The rational part of my brain said to just comply, move the tanks or screen them and avoid the hassle. But something deeper, more stubborn, rebelled against the injustice of it all. I'd done everything right, checked the rules before installing the tanks, made sure they were up to code. And now some power-hungry HOA president wanted to punish me for having the audacity to prepare for emergencies. When I got home, I found a surprise waiting for me. My neighbor Tom Fletcher was standing in my driveway looking at the propane tanks. "Hey, Lucas," he called out when he saw me. "Heard you're having trouble with the HOA. Word travels fast, small neighborhood. Listen, I wanted to say I think what they're doing is garbage. I grew up in Fairbanks, been here my whole life. My dad always taught me to have backup heat. Lost power for 3 days during a storm when I was a kid, and if we hadn't had a wood stove, we'd have frozen." "Thanks, Tom. Wish you'd been at that board meeting." "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I did some checking. Deborah and her crew live in the newer section of the development, the part that was built 5 years ago. All their houses have dual fuel systems built in. They've got natural gas and electric as standard." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. So their houses already have backup heat. Exactly. But the older section, where most of us live, only has natural gas and those dinky electric baseboards. They're requiring you to remove safety equipment they don't need because they already have the equivalent. That's not just stupid, it's dangerous. You're preaching to the choir, buddy. Look, I can't afford to get on Deborah's bad side. She already doesn't like me because I refuse to vote for her. But I wanted you to know you're not crazy and you're not alone. Tom's support helped, but it didn't change my situation. The deadline came and went. On the 15th day, I found another notice on my door. This one informed me that I was being fined $500 per day, retroactive to the deadline date. I now owed $1,000 with the total climbing every 24 hours. I called Robert Vasquez again. This time, I wrote him the retainer check. "We'll file an injunction to stop the fines while we challenge the bylaw changes," he explained. "But I need to be honest with you, Lucas. These cases can take months to resolve, and there's no guarantee we'll win. What are my odds? Better than 50-50. The notification issue is solid, and we can argue that essential safety equipment should be exempt from purely aesthetic regulations. But HOA law in Alaska is still developing and judges can be unpredictable. Do it. File everything." Robert got to work, and for a while, things seemed to stabilize. The injunction was granted, stopping the fines temporarily. Deborah sent me several nasty emails through the HOA portal, but she couldn't do much else while the legal process played out. Then the weather forecast changed everything. It was the first week of December when the meteorologists started talking about an Arctic blast heading our way. Not unusual for Fairbanks, but this one was predicted to be particularly severe. Temperatures were expected to drop to 40 below zero, potentially lower with wind chill. The Weather Service issued warnings about the danger of prolonged exposure and urged residents to prepare emergency supplies. I was at work when I got the first call from Sarah. "Lucas, people are going crazy at the stores. I just tried to get some extra groceries and the shelves are getting cleared out. Did you get what we need? mostly, but there's something else. I ran into Patricia Owens at the store. She was buying up propane tanks. I felt a grim satisfaction. Let me guess. She suddenly realized backup heat might be important. She didn't see me, but yeah, she had 3 small tanks in her cart, the portable ones for camping. Those won't last more than a few hours in cold like this. That's what I thought. Lucas, what if the gas really does go out? We'll be fine. We have the propane system. That's why I installed it. But Sarah's worry lingered in my mind for the rest of the day. When I got home, I did a full check of our heating systems. The natural gas was working fine, our primary furnace humming along efficiently. The electric baseboards were functional but expensive to run. And my propane tanks, the ones the HOA wanted gone, were full and connected to a secondary heating system I'd installed myself. We were prepared for anything. The storm hit on a Thursday night. The temperature dropped like a stone, going from a relatively mild 10 degrees to 20 below in a matter of hours. Wind howled around the house, driving snow into drifts that climbed halfway up our windows. I kept the natural gas furnace running and monitored the outside temperature on my weather station. Friday morning, I woke to find it was 35 below zero. The sun was barely a pale disk on the horizon, providing no warmth. I made coffee and checked the news. The storm was even worse than predicted. The entire Fairbanks area was essentially shut down. Schools were closed, businesses shuttered, and officials were urging everyone to stay inside. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Tom Fletcher. "Lucas, you still have power and heat." "Yeah, everything's working fine here. You?" "Same, but I just heard from the Johnsons down the street. Their natural gas is out." I felt my stomach drop. Out, like completely. Their furnace won't fire up. They called the gas company, and apparently there's a problem at one of the distribution stations. Something about the regulator freezing up. The company is trying to fix it, but it could take hours or even days. Days in this cold. That's what they said. The Johnsons have their electric heat cranked up, but you know how expensive that is. And if the power goes out too, they're in real trouble. I hung up and immediately checked our own gas supply. The furnace was still running, but I didn't know how long that would last if there was a system-wide problem. I switched over to the propane system just in case. Sarah came downstairs, wrapped in a heavy sweater despite the warmth inside. "Was that Tom?" I filled her in on the situation. Her face went pale. How many houses in the neighborhood could be affected? Most of them, if the gas really is out. The newer section might be okay since they have better electric systems, but the older section, we're all vulnerable. The calls started coming in over the next hour. First from neighbors asking if we still had heat, then from people I barely knew begging for advice. The gas outage was spreading, affecting more and more houses. The electric grid was straining under the increased load as everyone cranked up their baseboards, and the temperature kept dropping. By evening, it was 42 below zero. That's when Deborah called. "Lucas, this is Deborah Kingston." Her voice had lost all its officious arrogance. She sounded scared. "I need to speak with you about an urgent matter. I'm listening. The natural gas outage has affected my street. Several of us have lost heat. I know you have a propane system. I'm calling to ask if you'd be willing to help some of your neighbors in this emergency situation." I let the silence stretch out for a long moment. Sarah was watching me, her eyes questioning. "You mean the propane system you ordered me to remove?" I said finally. "Lucas, please. This isn't the time for grudges. People are in danger." "You're right. People are in danger because you made a stupid rule and refused to listen when I explained why it was dangerous." "I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling to ask for help. Margaret Chen's house is down to 55 degrees inside. She has 2 small children. Patricia Owens is elderly and on medication that needs to be kept at a certain temperature. We need your propane. My propane isn't going to heat the entire neighborhood, Deborah. Each tank is designed to support one house as backup, not supply multiple properties. Then what do you suggest? Her voice was rising, panic creeping in. The gas company says it could be 3 days before service is restored. The power company is warning of possible rolling blackouts because the grid is overloaded. If people don't have heat, they'll have to evacuate, and in this storm, that's incredibly dangerous. I closed my eyes, thinking. My anger at Deborah was still burning hot, but she was right about one thing. This wasn't about her or me anymore. It was about safety. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, I said. I'm going to share what I know and what I have with anyone who needs it, but first, you're going to do something for me. What? You're going to call an emergency HOA board meeting tonight, and you're going to formally rescind that bylaw about propane storage. Permanently. And you're going to send a recommendation to every homeowner in this development that they should install backup heating systems. Fine, yes, whatever you want, just please help us. I'll make some calls, give me an hour. I hung up and turned to Sarah. I need to go out. Out in this. People need help. I can't just sit here. She grabbed my arm. Lucas, it's deadly out there. I know. But I also know how to handle it. I've got the gear and I know what I'm doing. She searched my face, then nodded reluctantly. Be careful, please. I bundled up in my extreme cold weather gear, insulated coveralls, heavy parka, face mask, goggles, and mittens rated to 60 below. I looked like I was preparing for an Arctic expedition, but in these conditions, proper gear was life or death. My first stop was Tom Fletcher's house. He answered the door quickly, clearly watching for me. You're going out in this. Need your help. You still have that portable generator. Yeah, but I'm saving it in case my power goes out. I need to borrow it. There are people who need heat right now. Tom studied me for a moment, then nodded. Let me get my gear on. I'm coming with you. Together, we loaded Tom's generator into my truck, along with extension cords, space heaters, and other emergency supplies I'd accumulated over the years. Our first stop was Margaret Chen's house. Margaret opened the door looking terrified. Behind her, I could see her 2 kids huddled on the couch under a pile of blankets. The inside temperature gauge on her thermostat read 52 degrees. Lucas, Tom, thank God. I don't know what to do. The electric heat isn't keeping up. We're going to set you up with a generator and some space heaters, I said. It'll keep you warm until the gas comes back. It took 30 minutes to get her system running. The generator roared to life in her garage, and we positioned space heaters in the living room and bedrooms. Within minutes, the temperature started climbing. I can't thank you enough, Margaret said, tears in her eyes. When Deborah first talked about that propane rule, I didn't think it mattered. I should have listened to you. Right now, what matters is keeping your family warm, I said. Conserve fuel as much as possible. Keep everyone in one room if you can. We repeated the process at 3 more houses. Tom and I worked in shifts, one of us staying with the truck while the other went inside to set up equipment. The cold was brutal, even with proper gear. I could feel it trying to seep through every layer, searching for exposed skin. At Patricia Owens' house, we found her in bad shape. She'd been trying to heat her home with her oven, a dangerous practice that filled the house with gas fumes. Tom and I got her outside immediately, letting the cold air clear her head while we ventilated the house. I didn't know what else to do, she kept saying. I was so cold. We got her set up with a proper heating solution and made her promise not to use the oven again. By the time we finished, it was nearly midnight and I was exhausted. Back home, Sarah had hot soup waiting. I stripped off my frozen outer layers and collapsed at the kitchen table. "You look terrible," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Feel worse. But everyone we helped should be okay for now. Deborah called twice. She wants you to call her back." I groaned but picked up my phone. Deborah answered on the first ring. "Lucas, thank you. Margaret told me what you did. The board has agreed to rescind the propane bylaw. I'm sending out an official notice tonight." "Good. Because tomorrow I'm going to help anyone else who needs it, and I don't want any legal issues." "There won't be any, I promise. Lucas, I owe you an apology. A real one, not just words. I was wrong. About the propane, about not listening to your concerns, all of it." "You were wrong about more than that," I said. "You've been wrong about a lot of things since you became HOA president. This neighborhood doesn't need someone enforcing petty rules and acting like a dictator. It needs someone who actually cares about the community." "I know, and I'm going to do better, if you give me the chance." I wanted to stay angry at her, but the fear and genuine remorse in her voice made it hard. "We'll see. Right now, focus on making sure everyone on your street is safe." "I will. And Lucas, thank you. Really." The next morning, the temperature had dropped to 46 below zero. It was the coldest it had been in Fairbanks in over a decade. The news was full of stories about the deep freeze affecting all of interior Alaska. The natural gas outage was now confirmed to be system-wide, affecting hundreds of homes. Repair crews were working around the clock, but the extreme cold was making everything more difficult. I spent Saturday doing more emergency runs. Tom joined me again, and we were joined by a few other neighbors who had four-wheel drive vehicles and proper gear. We formed an impromptu emergency response team, delivering generators, heaters, and supplies to anyone who needed them. At one house, we found an elderly couple who had been without heat for over 24 hours. They were both showing signs of hypothermia, confused and lethargic. We called 911 immediately, then worked to warm them gradually while waiting for the ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly, despite the conditions, and transported them to the hospital. "They would have died if you hadn't found them," one of the paramedics told me. "Another few hours, maybe less." That hit me hard. This wasn't just about proving a point or winning an argument with an HOA. Lives were actually at stake. By Sunday, the gas company finally got the distribution system repaired. Heat started flowing back to the affected houses one by one. The temperature began to moderate slightly, climbing to a comparatively balmy 30 below. The crisis was passing. But the aftermath was just beginning. On Monday morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It turned out to be a reporter from the Fairbanks Daily News-Miner. "Mr. Xander, I'm writing a story about the natural gas outage and the community response. Several people have mentioned your name. Would you be willing to speak with me?" I was hesitant, but Sarah encouraged me to do it. "People should know what happened. Maybe it'll prevent something like this from happening in other neighborhoods." The interview took about 30 minutes. I explained the HOA situation, the propane ban, and the emergency response. I tried to keep the focus on safety and preparation rather than making it about my conflict with Deborah. The article ran the next day, front page. The headline read, "HOA propane ban nearly proves deadly during deep freeze." It detailed everything that had happened, including quotes from Margaret Chen about how my help had saved her family, and from the paramedics about the elderly couple we'd found. The story went viral, at least by Fairbanks standards. By Wednesday, it had been picked up by state news outlets. By Thursday, national news networks were calling. Apparently, HOA nearly kills neighbors by banning safety equipment was exactly the kind of outrage-inducing story that played well on cable news. I declined most of the interview requests, but the story took on a life of its own. Social media exploded with people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Local politicians started making statements about the need for HOA reform. The Alaska State Legislature announced they'd be reviewing HOA regulations in the upcoming session. Through it all, Deborah kept a low profile. True to her word, she'd rescinded the propane bylaw and sent out a recommendation for backup heating systems. But the damage to her reputation was done. People in the neighborhood who had previously supported her were now questioning her judgment. 2 weeks after the crisis, the HOA held its regularly scheduled board meeting. I attended, curious to see what would happen. The room was packed, more residents than I'd ever seen at one of these meetings. Deborah called the meeting to order, but before she could begin the agenda, Tom Fletcher stood up. "I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in the current board," he announced. "What happened during the cold snap was unacceptable. The board's decision to ban propane storage put lives at risk. We need new leadership." There were murmurs of agreement around the room. Deborah's face went pale. "That's not how this works," she protested. "You can't just call for a vote." "Actually, according to the bylaws, any homeowner can call for a special election with a petition signed by 25% of residents," Tom said. He held up a sheaf of papers. "I have signatures from 40%. Deborah looked around the room, seeing the faces of people who no longer trusted her. "I see. Then I suppose we should schedule that election." "No need," Margaret Chen said, standing up. "I'm resigning from the board effective immediately. This past month has shown me I don't have the judgment needed for this position." Patricia Owens stood next. "I'm resigning as well. I nearly killed myself using my oven for heat. I should have listened when Lucas explained why backup systems were important." All eyes turned to Deborah. She sat for a long moment, her shoulders sagging. "I resign as well," she said quietly. "You're right. I made terrible decisions and people could have died because of them. I'm sorry." The room was silent. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. A new board was elected at an emergency meeting 2 weeks later. Tom Fletcher was voted in as president, along with 2 other longtime Fairbanks residents who actually understood the challenges of living in the far north. Their first act was to pass a resolution encouraging all homeowners to install backup heating systems and offering to help coordinate bulk purchases of equipment to reduce costs. The story didn't end there, though. In January, I got a call from an attorney representing the elderly couple we'd found suffering from hypothermia. They were filing a lawsuit against the HOA, claiming that the propane ban had directly endangered their lives. They were seeking damages and a court order requiring the HOA to implement proper emergency preparedness standards. I was called as a witness. The case went to court in March, and I spent a full day on the stand explaining the technical aspects of heating systems, the dangers of extreme cold, and the events leading up to the crisis. The HOA's attorney tried to argue that the couple's condition wasn't directly caused by the propane ban, but it was a weak defense. The judge ruled in favor of the couple, awarding them $50,000 in damages, and issuing a permanent injunction requiring the HOA to maintain emergency preparedness guidelines. The ruling also required Deborah, Margaret, and Patricia to personally attend a course on HOA management and cold weather safety. But the biggest consequence came from the state legislature. In May, they passed a new law limiting HOA authority over safety equipment. The law specifically prohibited HOAs from banning backup heating systems, generators, fire safety equipment, or other emergency preparedness measures. It also strengthened notification requirements and gave homeowners more protection against arbitrary fines. Governor Mike Dunleavy signed it into law with much fanfare, citing our neighborhood's experience as proof that HOA reform was needed. I was invited to the signing ceremony, but declined. I'd had enough of being in the spotlight. Life slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board was reasonable and focused on actual community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. Several of my neighbors installed their own propane backup systems, and Tom organized a neighborhood emergency preparedness committee. Sarah and I even became friends with Margaret Chen. She was genuinely remorseful about her role in the propane ban and worked hard to make amends. Her kids sometimes played in our yard, and we'd have them over for barbecues in the summer. Deborah moved away in June. I heard she and her husband relocated to Arizona, somewhere warm where HOA disputes were probably about pool temperature rather than life-threatening heating failures. I never spoke to her again after that board meeting, but I didn't harbor any real hatred toward her. She'd been foolish and power-hungry, but she wasn't evil, just dangerously ignorant of the environment she lived in. Patricia Owens stayed in the neighborhood but kept a very low profile. I'd see her occasionally at the store or driving past, and we'd nod politely to each other. She'd installed a massive propane system at her house, visible from the street. Nobody complained. The following winter was mild by Fairbanks standards, never dropping below 20 below zero. But I kept my propane tanks full and my backup system maintained. I'd learned that preparation wasn't paranoia. It was survival. One evening in late November, almost exactly a year after the crisis, Tom Fletcher stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. We sat in my garage, the space heater glowing warmly, and talked about everything and nothing. "You know," Tom said, "I've been thinking about what happened last year, that whole mess with the HOA and the freeze and everything. Yeah, I think maybe it needed to happen. Not the people getting hurt part, obviously, but the wake-up call. This neighborhood, hell, this whole area, we've got a lot of folks who moved here without really understanding what they were getting into. They thought it would be like living anywhere else, just with more snow. They didn't get that this place can kill you if you're not prepared. And now they do. Now they do, because you stood up and fought for what was right, even when it would have been easier to just comply." I took a sip of my beer, considering. I didn't do it to be a hero, I did it because I was mad. Whatever the reason, it worked out. You saved lives, Lucas. Don't downplay that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind outside. It was getting cold again, winter settling in for its long stay. But this time, the neighborhood was ready. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dinner in 10 minutes. Is Tom staying?" I showed Tom the message. He shook his head. "Nah, I should get home. Kelly's making pot roast." We walked back outside together. Tom's breath fogged in the cold air as he zipped up his jacket. "Hey, Lucas," he said. "Thanks for everything. Back at you, man. Couldn't have done it without your help." He drove away, and I stood for a moment in my driveway, looking at the propane tanks on the side of my house. They were painted a neutral gray-green that blended reasonably well with the siding. Functional, maintained, and completely legal. I thought about how close things had come to disaster, how one stupid rule had nearly cost lives. It was a reminder that HOAs, like any organization, were only as good as the people running them. When those people prioritized power and aesthetics over safety and common sense, everyone suffered. But it was also a reminder that one person standing up could make a difference. If I just complied, removed the tanks to avoid conflict, who knows what would have happened during that freeze? How many more people would have been in danger? Sarah appeared at the door. "You coming in? Food's ready." "Yeah, just thinking. About how lucky we were, and how things could have gone so much worse." She came out and wrapped her arms around me despite the cold. But they didn't, because you prepared and you cared enough to help people who needed it. We helped. You were part of this too. Team effort, she agreed. Now come inside before we both freeze. We went in together, the warm air of our well-heated home enveloping us. Through the window, I could see other houses on the street, lights glowing warmly in the gathering darkness. Each one of them now had proper backup heating, proper emergency supplies, and proper understanding of what it meant to live in this harsh but beautiful place. The lawsuit settlement money from the HOA insurance had been distributed according to the court's ruling. The couple who'd nearly died from hypothermia used their portion to install a state-of-the-art heating system with triple redundancy. They'd stopped by to thank me personally and to show me what they'd done. It was overkill, probably, but I understood the impulse. When you've come that close to dying from cold, you never wanted to feel that vulnerable again. The legal fees for my own case had been covered by the judge's ruling as well, which meant the $5,000 retainer I'd paid Robert Vasquez had been refunded. Sarah and I used that money to take a vacation to Hawaii in February, our first real trip together in years. Sitting on a warm beach, watching the sunset over the Pacific, the events of the previous winter felt almost surreal. But they'd been real, and the lessons learned from them were important. When we got back to Fairbanks, I gave a presentation to the City Council about HOA regulations and emergency preparedness. Several other municipalities in Alaska adopted similar ordinances to the state law, ensuring that no HOA could ban essential safety equipment. I also started volunteering with a local emergency preparedness nonprofit, teaching classes on cold weather survival and home winterization. It felt good to turn my anger and frustration into something constructive, to help people avoid the kind of crisis we'd experienced. Through it all, my propane tanks sat quietly on the side of my house, doing their job. They were a visible reminder of why preparation mattered, why common sense had to win out over arbitrary rules, and why sometimes you had to fight for what was right even when it was difficult. The neighborhood had changed in other ways too. The new HOA board focused on actual community building rather than enforcement. They organized block parties, winter festivals, and emergency response drills. People knew their neighbors now, looked out for each other. The sense of community that should have been there all along finally developed. In April, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Deborah, postmarked from Scottsdale, Arizona. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, several pages long. In it, Deborah apologized again for what had happened. She explained that she'd been dealing with her own issues at the time, struggling with the move to Alaska, feeling out of control in a new and frightening environment. Being HOA president had given her a sense of power and purpose, but she'd let it go to her head. She wrote about the therapy she'd been doing since moving to Arizona, working through her control issues and anxiety. She acknowledged that nothing excused what she'd done, but she wanted me to understand that it hadn't come from a place of malice, just fear and ignorance. The letter ended with another apology and a simple statement. "You were right, and I was wrong. I'm sorry it took a crisis for me to see that. I hope everyone in the neighborhood is doing well, and I hope someday you might be able to forgive me." I showed the letter to Sarah. She read it carefully, then looked at me. "Are you going to write back?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me thinks there's nothing to say." She seems genuinely sorry. She is. But sorry doesn't change what happened. It doesn't give back the money people spent on emergency repairs or erase the trauma of nearly freezing to death. "No," Sarah agreed. "But forgiveness isn't really about her, is it? It's about you letting go of the anger. She was right, as usual. I sat down that evening and wrote a short reply. I acknowledged Deborah's apology and told her I appreciated her honesty. I didn't say I forgave her, because I wasn't entirely sure I did yet, but I told her I hoped she was doing better and that I bore her no ill will. Whether or not I mailed it was a decision I could make later. Summer came to Fairbanks in its brief, intense glory. The sun barely set. The temperatures soared into the 70s and 80s, and everyone spent as much time outside as possible, knowing winter would return all too soon. My propane tank sat unused but ready, checked and maintained regularly. Tom Fletcher and I had become close friends through the whole ordeal. We went fishing together on the Chena River, worked on our vehicles in each other's garages, and had our families over for dinners regularly. His kids and our future kids would probably grow up together, I realized. We were putting down real roots here. One evening in July, during a neighborhood barbecue the HOA had organized, Margaret Chen pulled me aside. "I wanted you to know," she said, "my company is relocating me in the fall. We're moving to Anchorage." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. We'll miss you." "We'll miss you too. But I wanted to say thank you one more time before we go, not just for helping us during the freeze, but for teaching all of us an important lesson. My kids are older now, old enough to understand what happened. I've been teaching them about preparation and safety, about thinking ahead and not just following rules blindly. That's good. Those are important lessons. They are. And they learned them because of you," she smiled. "My daughter told me the other day that when she grows up, she wants to be an engineer like Mr. Xander, so she can help people too." That hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so much time being angry about the HOA situation that I hadn't really thought about the positive impact it might have had on people, especially kids. "Tell her she can be anything she wants," I said. "Engineer, doctor, teacher, whatever. As long as she uses her brain and her heart to help people, that's what matters." Margaret gave me a hug, then rejoined her family. I stood for a moment, watching the neighborhood gathering. People laughing, eating, kids running around playing games. This was what a community should be. Not uniform paint colors and enforced aesthetic standards, but people looking out for each other, supporting each other, being there when times got tough. The autumn came, and with it the preparation for another winter. This time, there was no resistance when people started installing backup heating systems. In fact, the HOA helped coordinate group purchases of propane tanks and generators, getting better prices through bulk ordering. I helped several neighbors with their installations, making sure everything was done safely and up to code. It felt good to use my engineering knowledge to help people, to know that the neighborhood would be better prepared for whatever winter threw at us. The first snow fell in late September, earlier than usual. By October, we had a solid pack on the ground. The temperature dropped steadily through November, and by December, we were back in the deep freeze. But this time, when the natural gas system had a minor hiccup during a particularly cold snap, nobody panicked. People switched to their backup systems seamlessly. The HOA's emergency committee, which Tom chaired, checked on vulnerable residents and made sure everyone had what they needed. The system worked exactly as it should have the previous year. On Christmas Eve, Sarah and I hosted a small gathering at our house. Tom and his family, a few other neighbors, and even Robert Vasquez, the attorney who'd helped me fight the HOA. We ate, drank, and told stories about the crazy year we'd had. "You know what the best part about all this is?" Tom said, raising his glass. "Next year is going to be boring. No drama, no crises, just normal neighborhood life." "I'll drink to boring," I agreed. We toasted to boring, safe, properly prepared winters. Outside, the temperature was 30 below zero, but inside, we were warm and comfortable and safe. My propane tanks hummed quietly in the background, ready if needed but not actively required. As everyone was leaving, Robert pulled me aside. "I got a call last week from an attorney in Juneau," he said. "There's a neighborhood there having similar issues with their HOA banning generators. They wanted to know if you'd be willing to consult on their case." "Consult how?" "Just share your experience, maybe testify if it goes to court." "They'd pay for your time and travel." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, to leave all this behind and just live my life. But then I thought about Margaret's daughter wanting to be an engineer to help people. I thought about the couple who'd nearly died from hypothermia. I thought about all the people who might be in danger because their HOAs didn't understand the importance of emergency preparation. "Yeah," I said. "I'll help." Robert smiled. "I thought you might. I'll set up a call with them after the new year." After everyone left, Sarah and I cleaned up the party remnants in comfortable silence. When we finally sat down, exhausted, on the couch, she leaned her head on my shoulder. "You're going to do it, aren't you? The consulting thing." "How'd you know?" "Because I know you. You can't stand by when you know people might be in danger." "Is that okay?" "Of course it is. I'm proud of you, Lucas. What you did this year, standing up to the HOA, helping everyone during the crisis, pushing for real change. You made a difference." "We made a difference," I corrected. "You were there every step of the way." "Team effort," she said, echoing her words from a year ago. We sat there as the clock ticked toward midnight, toward Christmas Day, toward a new year full of possibilities. Outside, the aurora borealis danced across the sky, green and purple ribbons of light that seemed to celebrate our survival and resilience. The propane tank stood silent guard outside, ready and waiting. They'd been at the center of everything that happened, the physical embodiment of preparation versus appearance, of safety versus compliance. They'd nearly been banned, nearly been removed, nearly led to disaster. But they were still there, and so were we. In January, I did consult on the Juneau case. My testimony helped the homeowners there win their fight against an overreaching HOA. That led to more calls, more cases, more opportunities to help people stand up for common sense and safety. I never became a professional expert witness or anything like that. I kept my job as an engineer, kept my life in Fairbanks. But when people needed help fighting dangerous HOA rules, when neighborhoods needed someone to explain why preparation mattered more than aesthetics, I was there. The neighborhood in Fairbanks became something of a model for HOA reform. The state legislature even sent a committee to interview residents and board members when they were drafting additional regulations. Our experience, both the crisis and the recovery, informed policy decisions that would affect thousands of Alaskans. Years later, when people asked me about that winter, about the fight with the HOA and everything that came after, I always told them the same thing. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about being prepared, standing up for what was right, and refusing to let stupid rules endanger people I cared about. Sometimes that meant fighting. Sometimes it meant helping. Sometimes it meant forgiving people who'd made terrible mistakes. But always, always, it meant putting safety and common sense first. The propane tanks are still there on the side of my house. They're weathered now, showing the wear of multiple Alaskan winters. But they're still functional, still maintained, still ready, just like they always should have been. Just like I tried to tell Deborah Kingston all those years ago, when she showed up on my porch with her manila folder and her tight-lipped smile, trying to enforce a rule that made no sense. She'd learned her lesson the hard way. We all had, but we'd learned it, and that made all the difference.